Hello and welcome. For the next 2 days, the world we have created for you for Disruptive Seasons Spring 2022 is the future. We have skyline keynote stages, flying cars, and more importantly, our speakers, who will be sharing with us their expert insights around various technology topics. I'm your host, Kate Bennett of Disruptive Live. Please feel free to share, like, and comment on the sessions. We would love to hear your thoughts. Without further ado, I give you our first guest, Darren Falwell, Product Evangelist of IP Fabric.
The Greek philosopher Heraclitus is credited with saying that the only constant is change. And who could argue with him, given what life in the 2020s looks like? In our uncertain world, we must be adaptable, able to pivot and switch to new ways of living and working as the world evolves. Business conditions too are constantly in flux, and as IT underpins every modern business process, so your IT operations need to be able to rise to the challenge and deliver agility. Now, traditionally, IT services have been difficult to build and maintain. Highly skilled techies were employed to deploy and manage the infrastructure that was needed to provide those applications. Everything from rack space and power and cooling to the servers, the storage and the operating systems. And once they were built, yet more engineering resource and know-how were then required to provide secure connectivity to ensure that those applications were always available. Then one day, along came the cloud, and we were saved. The infrastructure was revolutionized, and now we had as much resource and capacity as we would ever need, provisioned on demand and paid for by the second of uptime. But this meant that the bottleneck in application provision shifted very firmly, unfortunately, to the network, as the agility there just could not match that of cloud infrastructure. But why? My name is Darren Fulwell, and I'm a network architect and product evangelist for IP Fabric. I'm going to spend a few minutes just explaining why many network operations teams aren't able to deliver the flexible, adaptable service that you need to be able to stay ahead of the curve. And of course, how IP Fabric's automated network assurance platform can help fix that for you. So let's start digging into that problem a little more. Ultimately, networks are not easy. I can hear the network engineers in the room cheering now. Vendors may say that they're making them simpler, but in reality, what they're doing is hiding a complexity of overlays and underlays and encapsulation behind a thin veneer of management GUI in order to make that claim. While it may appear that they've become easier to consume, in reality, there are more moving parts in networks than ever before. It's clear that very few organizations have just one network. Take your typical enterprise. They might have some wireless and campus LAN in each of their office locations, a WAN interconnecting their sites. It may be of the traditional or the software-defined variety. They may have cloud provision and a data center or two if, like most organizations, they're looking to develop a hybrid cloud approach. And of course, they'll have internet-facing services and a DMZ. Now, each of those is separate, each with its own management challenges, and all of them have been built to work together to deliver applications to users and customers. To add to the complexity, they're often managed by different teams of subject matter experts, with end user and application service teams layered on top. They may have their own individual processes and their own tooling, either specific to the main or in some cases shared. Now you'll notice there are spaces between those teams, processes and toolings. These are knowledge or skills gaps. And in order for systems to deliver an end-to-end service, those gaps need to be bridged, encouraging collaboration between those subject matter experts and the systems in their silos. There'll often be questions that need to be answered, like, are all of the important devices monitored in my network? What role does each device play in the delivery of applications? Am I sending logs and alerts to a central event correlation system? And am I making it easy to support the network by keeping configurations consistent and templated across that network end to end? Without a single common view of the network, those gaps simply won't be filled. Some organizations try and use documentation to help, but the overhead of keeping written documentation updated after every add, move, and change that happens in the network is such that it's nearly impossible to trust that they're up to date. Ask any network engineer about the pain of updating Visio diagrams and spreadsheets every time they make a modification to their infrastructure. If there were a way to create a single definitive view of the network end to end, information could then start to flow more freely between these teams and their processes and the tooling. And by automating the process of collection and collation of that data, it can be made available at speed to whoever needs it in whichever form works for them. IP Fabric's network assurance platform puts an arm around the whole network, automatically gathering data from all of its constituent elements, and creates a vendor-agnostic data model containing all the inventory, configuration, topology, and state data that it can find. It's able to build a picture of the forwarding and policy behavior of the network from user to workload, wherever they are, and then makes that data available to whoever wants to consume it. For example, we help ensure that you know all of the IP addresses and VLANs in use across the network, that your WAN is routing your LAN subnets correctly, whether applications on cloud workloads are accessible from your users, that you have an inventory that's accurate for all of the network equipment across your organization, and if changes that were completed last night were successfully implemented, and that you've got a picture of the state before and after to prove it. And of course, for the security folk, that the security policy is having the desired effect. Now, all of these questions and so many more are answered using IP Fabric's discovery, modeling, intent, and path checks, and all without any manual documentation updates. And so you can now look to automate your network infrastructure end to end, because you have that holistic, accurate view of the network that you can trust. Your supporting tooling, your monitoring, your ITSM, your CMDB, intended state database configuration, automation, etc., they could all use the same harmonized data view with no clashes. And now the idea of a self-service, cloud-like agility without compromising security or availability becomes possible for the network. Our customers are seeing the benefit of this approach day in and day out. Some of the world's most agile organizations use our platform to underpin their automated network operations, leading to huge savings in time and resource in their automation efforts. Use the QR code on screen or visit ipfabric.io today to see how you can start your journey to a more agile network infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. That was a fantastic opening presentation. Let's head straight into the next.
Hello and welcome to this talk on technologies for ubiquitous electronics. My name is Dr. Matthew Dyson and I'm a Senior Technology Analyst at IDTechX. Just before we get started, I'd just like to give you a very brief introduction to IDTechX. So we provide technical market research on a wide range of emerging technologies covering things like energy harvesting, electric vehicles, 5 and 6G, printed electronics, and many more. So just to get started, I'd like to sort of start by asking, what is ubiquitous electronics? And essentially, this is an idea that many things around us will be connected to the internet and have electronic functionality. So you might already have heard of this discussed with phrases like Internet of Things or even Industrial Internet of Things, but the ubiquitous electronics goes slightly beyond that and asks, okay, well, not only are we going to put electronics into various, say, household devices, like we might with Internet of Things, but we might also have them in buildings, in roads, even on our bodies. Basically, everywhere around us will become wirelessly connected with sensing capability. And so why might we want to do all of that? Well, the advantage of this is that it would enable things like predictive maintenance. For example, if you had a house or an office, and you can see the example on the slide here, where there was a leak occurring in the walls, you could have sensors in there that would detect the first appearance of moisture, and then you'd be able to issue some kind of alert. The plumber could come around and fix it before it became a problem. You could have a factory and the machine starts vibrating a little bit more than usual. Again, that would alert somebody to come and fix the problem before it became serious enough to shut down the whole production line. If you had a smart city, there could be issues with roads or pipes or pollution, and all of this can feed in, all this information can feed into some sort of centralized database, and then you can end up allocating resources more appropriately, routing traffic, making repairs, matching up supply chains to demand more effectively, all kinds of benefits. And so if we just take a little look at this picture, here's a sort of typical office. And so just imagine all of the opportunities for electronics in that office. We're already completely familiar with having smartphones and obviously computers, but how about checking the air quality or the humidity level in there? What about plants that water themselves automatically? What about floors that track people where they walk around? And so they can determine, occupancy levels, particularly appropriate with COVID. Are there too many people in a room without any privacy concerns? They can check that you're sitting comfortably to ensure you're not going to get any back pain for sitting in the same posture too long or something like that. So there's all kinds of opportunities to integrate electronics into our everyday environment. The question is, how do we go about doing this? And that's where these low-cost print and flexible sensors come in. If you want the electronics to be ubiquitous, they obviously need to be cheap. And ideally, you want them to be small and compact enough that you can install them pretty much anywhere. So here's just a selection of examples from various companies and organizations on this slide, showing the kind of things, kind of sensing capabilities that you might not be aware of. Things like pressure sensors that are thin films that you can put under the floor, temperature sensors that you can put around a car battery to monitor whether that battery is getting overheated or indeed needs warming up. And you could even put them around wounds and then check, you can monitor the progress of the healing by seeing the amount of additional blood flow. There's printed electrodes that you can attach to yourself to monitor your heart rate. You could do these install these at home rather than having to go into the doctors or the hospital to get your ECG done. Vibration sensors that are thin that you could just stick onto industrial equipment to monitor vibration levels. And even gas sensors that are flexible. And so there's an example here of one it's just a prototype at this stage, but you could attach it to a deodorant can and it would even give you a score as to how much deodorant should you be using based on some sensing. And of course, you can combine all of these functionalities, as I'm showing in the top right, with this multimodal sensor. And so you could imagine a world where you just have sort of stickers with loads of sensing capabilities that would also contain batteries or some kind of energy harvesting method, and also antennas to communicate to the internet via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. And then we'd be able to record information about pressure, force, temperature, strain, humidity, all kinds of things, pretty much from anywhere, extremely affordably. So if we take a closer look at some sort of specific examples here, we then get to electronic skin patches for continuous healthcare monitoring. And there's a huge amount of excitement about these at the moment, particularly in light of COVID, with health services worldwide are sort of somewhat overburdened trying to get through their backlog. If patients are able to be monitored at home, obviously that's good for them. They don't have to waste time going to the doctors or the hospital, and it's obviously good for the health service or healthcare providers as well. And so the basic idea with these is that you can do basic continuous monitoring with some kind of skin patch. And at the moment, you can see over on the right of the slide, there's an example of what's already being used in some Belgian hospitals, where all of the electronics are in a little box, but like a matchbox that contains a circuit board and the battery, but the rest of the actual electrodes that are spaced out, in this case to monitor ECGs or brain activity, are all flexible. But over time, the technology will progress, and ultimately we'll end up with something very much more like a kind of tattoo And so this is a sort of example from a university in the States, I think, down at the bottom, where you can imagine something like those children's tattoos, a little transfer, all the electronic functionality would be in there, and you'd barely know you had it on, and that would be able to supply all kinds of information, temperature, heart rate, monitor your sweat, all kinds of stuff to your phone, and then ultimately send that off to your doctor, and then they'd let you know if there are any issues, or if you're recovering from an operation, if you had to go back in, or something like that, in an incredibly unobtrusive fashion. So, of course, if you're going to put electronics everywhere, sustainability is a significant concern. We don't want to be sort of polluting the world and contributing to the huge amount of electronic waste by covering everything in electronics. And so there's various approaches to try and get all of these benefits that I've described from having both people and cars and packaging and households and all these devices around us connected to the internet with sensing capability, but keeping it sustainable. And so that can be achieved in sort of various ways. People are looking at things like putting electronics onto paper rather than onto plastic or rigid circuit board substrates. There are batteries that are entirely biodegradable, so these kind of toxic little coin cell batteries that are a pain to dispose of. You have to theoretically dispose of them properly. You can get rid of those, have something that's completely biodegradable. You can use copper inks rather than other metals, because copper will break down much more quickly if it's discarded. And so the idea here is that you could, for example, take some packaging on any product you get at the supermarket and just put the electronics straight onto the packaging, and it doesn't need to be plastic packaging. It could be paper or card packaging, and you could still get the electronics in there. So this idea that there's no way that this can happen because there'll be too much electronic waste simply isn't really true. There's a lot of effort going into making electronics as sustainable, and also sort of smaller and more compact so that there's less waste in general. So just to finish up with, I'd like to show you this kind of adoption roadmap for the different technologies that I've sort of described as we go through. Of course, RFID tags are perhaps an everyday example of ubiquitous electronics. We've all got these in our smart cards that we use to get on the tube or use at the bank or whatever. That's completely standard, and they're also in many items of clothing so that shops can keep track of inventory, and they're completely established. And the various other technologies there are obviously at different stages, and I think particularly important to point out is the amount of emphasis and interest at the moment that's going into these electronic skin patches. It's a huge amount of investment going into these, and I think they could well become kind of pretty widespread within the next few years, and indeed some examples are already being used. So everything that I've spoken about today within the ubiquitous electronic world, this idea that electronics are going to become increasingly widespread, and all of the technologies needed for that can all be found in a selection of the market research reports from IDTechX, covering things like printed and flexible sensors, smart cities, e-textiles, skin patches. There are many others on subjects like smart packaging. And so if you're interested in any of those, please do get in touch, or feel free to contact me directly. Thanks very much for your attention.
We are now joined by Dr. Audrey Tang, a chartered psychologist.
Would you like one? They're fluffy, sweet, tasty. Or would you maybe prefer to wait until, say, I've finished this talk if I could promise you a larger reward at the end of it? That is what the children in the now famous marshmallow test delivered in Stanford in the 70s were asked. They were given the choice of having the marshmallow now, or perhaps a marshmallow and another treat a little bit later on. And that's when the experimenters left the room. Now, whilst that experiment is not without its critics, it was a longitudinal study. And the results have found that delayed gratification, in other words, not having the marshmallow just yet, was actually associated with better life outcomes. We know that a moment on the lips can mean an hour on the treadmill. We also know that a night of passion may lead to a lifetime of regret. So why do we do it? Well, Freud would say we're driven by the pleasure principle. We want to have it now. Alternatively, the neuroscientists would say it's the dopamine effect. What happens is, whenever we give in to our impulse, we get this little hit of dopamine, and that makes us feel so good that it makes us want to do it again. The problem with dopamine, though, is that it's very powerful. It's not very discerning. And research has shown that rats would continue to press a lever which would give them an electric shock simply because their brains were also wired up to have the dopamine pathway stimulated. And it's not helped by our swipe left, swipe right culture. You could buy now, pay later. You can only access a limited supply. Maybe even get the early bird. The world around us, marketing executives, they're encouraging us to have it right now, and consequences be damned. And you know what? Positive psychology has got in on this too. Seize the day. There's no time like the present. The only thing about that is that when it comes to seizing the day, that's a remedy for procrastination, not necessarily a lifestyle guide. The problem is our brains are set up to survive. And actually, not so long ago, even as early, perhaps, in our history as the 15 to 1800s, survival didn't look all that long. It was therefore essential, if not important at the very least, to make the most of what you have in hand rather than wait later on, because later on may not arrive. Between 15 and 1800, the lifespan was on average 30 to 40 years. By that calculation, I shouldn't even be here talking to you today. However, things have changed, and technology, hygiene practices, medicine, they have all improved. And as such now, our lifespan can be from 70 to 80 years, which is fabulous. Except for the fact that epidemiologists have warned us recently that because of some of the decisions that we're making during our current lifespan, we're actually curtailing our expectancy by years. Type 2 diabetes, other diseases that are preventable are because of lifestyle choices, meaning that we don't get to experience the amazing future possibilities and opportunities around us. And it's not just enough to want to reach that future. It's as important to thrive and flourish within it. So, how are we going to enjoy what we have right now, as well as preparing ourselves to grasp the opportunities that are possibly around us and are waiting for us? I'm going to give you two tools. The first is a visualization, and I'd like you to imagine your ideal future self. Where are you living? What are you doing? Who is in your life? What problems are you solving? What legacy are you leaving? Get that image really clear in your mind, and you may find that what you're seeing in your future perhaps is a little bit different from what you're experiencing right now. That's where the second tool comes in. Now, you may know this as the Mayer Wheel of Life, or the coaching wheel, or the well-being wheel. But I'm going to show you how this tool can really help you achieve the future you that you see in your ideal. I want you to draw a circle. It doesn't have to be perfect. And the difference between the way I'm creating this tool and using this tool is that you do not need to use even segments to break up that wheel. What I want you to do is to think about that ideal future self, and I want you to break down the wheel into all the things that you need in your life to make up that ideal. So it may be things like family. But for you, family might be really important. That might take up a whole quarter of the wheel. That's okay. It might be that travel is important to you, but not as important. So that might be a little bit smaller. Then you might have career. That might also be important to you. Finances, exercising, spirituality, all of those different things that make up your ideal future. So you complete this. You've got career, you've got exercise, you've got spirituality, you've got relationships, you've got a number of different factors. The next thing, on a scale of 0 in the middle to 10 on the outside, you need to mark on that wheel where you are right now in your current life. So maybe you haven't actually spent a lot of time with your family, so maybe that's like a 2 or a 3. Maybe traveling, you also haven't done very much, and that's like a 1 or a 2. Maybe your career, that's been going really well, so we're 7 or 8 for that. Exercise, you're doing okay, so 6 or 7. Maybe you've been getting your meditation in, so your spirituality or your community work or your sense of purpose, that might be at also a 6 or a 7. And your relationships with your friends and the people that you love, that might be also at a 7 or 8. You now have a visual representation of where you are right now. But also you have a little indication of what you might need to do in order to achieve that ideal future you. And the reason why I ask you to set your own segments is because when it comes to making your choices as to what to do and where you're going to improve, you can see that both family and travel may be quite low down. But to you, or to this person here, family is more important because it takes up more space in that wheel. And therefore, when you have the choice of potentially doing something that may sabotage years of effort trying to build that future you, or perhaps you're just at a loose end and wondering what you're going to do with yourself, you have one question to ask. What is it that I can do that's going to move me one step closer towards my future ideal? And a secret second question, is what I'm about to do going to move me one step away from it? Life is full of decisions. And unlike what people presume, that it's the big decisions that really make the difference, it's the tiny little choices that we make every single day that become habits, and they shape our life. So, I think I'm going to save it for later.
Coming up next, we are delighted to be joined by Rob Batters, Director of Managed and Technical Services at North Door.
Hello, I have a question for you. Who's looking after your data? I mean, right now. My name is Rob Batters and I'm Director of Managed and Technical Services at North Door PLC. And if you'll indulge me, I've got some other questions for you. Do you have full control over every element of the service or product you deliver? That's from A to Z, from start to finish? Do you use partners to deliver your service or your product? Perhaps just as importantly, do they use partners to deliver your service? Do your partners and theirs handle your data? Do you know how good their security is? All of which leads to the most important question. Can you trust your supply chain? And can you trust it with your data? Before I attempt to answer that, let's put this into some context. The UK's National Cyber Security Centre has issued an alert. Now, they're warning businesses that there's an increasing threat of ransomware-type cyber attacks. The last 2 years has seen a real increase, both in their number and indeed their sophistication. A good example is the double extortion attack that sees cyber criminals not only steal a company's data, but also threaten to publish it. Now, this can be particularly effective in targeting certain sectors where the data is incredibly sensitive. So, if some part of your supply chain has access to your data, then this represents a risk that you need to consider. And you won't be alone in that. Now, of course, as a consequence, it follows that supply chains are an area of real interest for cyber criminals. Such people are always seeking less well-guarded entry points into networks and systems. You may have been through your own security with a fine-tooth comb, but what about the other guy? You know the one. He's the guy who does a great job for you, never fails. But is his business as secure as yours? Do you know? It's clear that businesses need to do more to ensure that they have an insight into the vulnerability of their supply chains and that any gaps in security are plugged. For too long, trust between partners in a supply chain has been based on perception rather than hard fact. There's quite a natural assumption that every member of the chain is competent to deliver the tasks that it says it can. You may have been doing business with your partners for years, and for that extra peace of mind, maybe you prepare and issue maybe questionnaires and spreadsheets like that, and even maybe take up references with third parties for reassurance. But ultimately, your partners are asking for your trust. There's also the matter of the integrity of every member of the chain. Simply put, there's an assumption that they will fulfill their promises. This is usually taken as a given, and it's regularly based upon your own experience with them. I mean, that's great, but as they say, past performance is no guarantee of the future. Now, such intangible measurements cannot ensure that your partner is looking after your data. It can't ensure that they pay as much attention to their own cybersecurity as you do to your own. The possibility exists, therefore, that trust without evidence could result in an open back door into your very own infrastructure. There has to be a better and more comprehensive approach to securing supply chains. Something else to consider is our old friend GDPR. Now, as a result of GDPR, any supply chain partner working for you with your personal data in any way at all becomes your data processor. Now, therefore, it is a regulatory requirement to have the right to audit their IT service as part of your contract. In my experience, I've been working with my own business partners and to that end, and some of them have spent quite some time going over my own security arrangements. And we do that as an in-person scheduled event. We treat it as a mutual exchange of what we see going on in the world, and we agree to make changes as the world changes around us. Now, some might consider such a meeting to be an ordeal to be endured, but it's really not about the examination. It's about a process, an ongoing process with a regular checkpoint about how are we doing, how can we do this better, and how can we do this together. Now, quite often, you'll find that an IT audit takes the form of a self-certification spreadsheet. Perhaps your partner fills it in a form once a year. Now, not everyone has the time to sit down and examine everyone else's security systems in a fine detail. So while questionnaires of this form still have their place in supplier governance, they cannot offer a true reflection of the state of a partner's IT practices and cyber defense capability at a point in anything more than a point in time. So, what's the solution? Ransomware and other attacks are not going to go away. A brief look at the headlines will confirm that it's a turbulent old world out there right now. However, it's not all bad news, and there's some help at hand. The NCSC is a really good source of information. On their website, you'll find their 12 principles of supply chain security. And if you've got the time to take a look, I do recommend it. It's a very, very good read. Furthermore, it has recently launched its ransomware hub, a place to learn about the threat of ransomware and what you can do to better secure your data. Now, it's widely agreed that education plays a key part in preventing attacks. Indeed, this goes beyond the simple classroom presentation to the more practical. Some anti-phishing solutions offer not just filtering, but also in-mail alerts to educate the end user about the likely veracity of the very email that they're looking at. Others provide the ability to deliver custom phishing simulations so we can test our users and learn about them, the way they work, and for them to learn more about phishing and what they can do about it. Above all, it's important that we keep talking about the threats we face, both employee to employee and partner to partner. Some businesses are turning to AI-powered software that allows companies to gain a 360-degree accurate view of not only their own security, but the entire supply chain from A to Z, from start to finish, giving them real insight into possible vulnerabilities which otherwise may well have been missed. So I asked a question: can you trust your supply chain, and can you trust it with your data? You will be able to give a much more confident answer to that question if you gain an informed and clear view of possible gaps in security throughout the supply chain. The need to close these gaps should become a mutual challenge, working together for the common good towards a secure relationship and a matter of ongoing conversation between partners, maybe even a contractual obligation. The back door that so many cyber criminals are looking to access and exploit then becomes just that little bit less attractive. Come on, everybody, let's close the door.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Rob. We have some more great content in our next interview. Over to you, David.
Hi, I'm David Terra. I'm the founder and CXO of a digital strategy consultancy called Agile Elephant. Today we're going to be talking about something very exciting, something that started as a kind of a tactical reaction to the COVID pandemic and actually is going to be the future way that the NHS tackles innovation. So I'm delighted to be talking about this topic. I've got Sookie Panasal with me. Sookie, can you introduce yourself and what you do and how you fit in?
Dave, thank you very much for that. So I'm Sookie. I'm the Deputy Director for Strategy and Development within the Data and Analytics teams in NHS England and NHS Improvement.
Excellent. Now we're going to be talking about something called the Analyst X community. Can you tell me what that is and what it's all about?
Well, David, thank you for the very kind introduction. So no pressure there. So if I start a little bit with the pandemic and then I'll come to Analyst X, I think we all recognize that the pandemic had taken a huge toll on us emotionally, physically, mentally. It's affected not only some of us directly, but our loved ones as well. And I think what it has demonstrated is no health system was really ready to deal with the challenges of the pandemic. And in a way, we needed to think very differently about how we provide health and care to our patients and citizens. But fundamentally, how do we work as NHS staff members? Because we don't seem to have innovated on that front. So I work in a data and analytics team, which consists of about 600 data professionals and analysts, so one of the largest around probably. And one of the things that we had been trying to do before the pandemic is how do we get our analysts to start collaborating and working more closely with each other? So very simple things such as create some dashboards, don't create them 42 times or 500 times, create one, have a discussion around it, refine, with the idea to reduce a lot of the duplication that goes on within the NHS. Because within the NHS, unfortunately, we tend to duplicate a lot of the stuff that we do, as you can imagine. So we had a very low bar, which was essentially get about 30 or 40 of our analysts to actually start collaborating. And what we've been really surprised by through this social movement called Analyst X is over time, it's been 2 years now, we've managed to get about 16,500 data professionals and analysts not just from within the NHS, but the private sector, the volunteer sector, all coming together, wanting to learn from each other. So we've actually been able to bring a profession that was perhaps not heard of before in a unified way, working and doing all the things that they need to be doing.
Excellent. And you started this literally just a few days before lockdown in March 2020, isn't that right?
This is true. So we were told on March 20th that we needed to start working from home. So it was literally created 3 hours before we were told we needed to leave the building. And we use a very famous online collaboration platform within the NHS, set up by someone known as Pollyanna Jones, the Future NHS platform. And we essentially just put a few things together and said, here are some dashboards that people will be needing to look at, and created a few discussion forums. And then we all headed our way home, and then one thing led to the next, led to the next. It's now become a community with lots of sub-communities. It almost feels like a world on its own, where all sorts of things happen, David, as you found out.
As I found out. But no, I mean, but that's exciting, because if you were expecting maybe 60 in the first month, and you got 1,000, and then it was growing at about 1,000 a month.
Correct.
Now, towards the end of last year, you asked Agile Elephant to actually write a report for you.
Yes.
Tell us what you wanted us to do and why you asked us.
So I think one of the things I was very keen on is, yes, we know anecdotally that we had done some good stuff and what we'd heard from some of the users, but we're very much in the mindset of, we think there's a lot more we need to do. We made mistakes along the way. What can we learn? And how can we do better than what we traditionally do in the NHS, which is have something that has a short life and then move on to the next thing. So how do we build on to that? So I think, David, for me, it was, how do I bring an independent organization to actually show the mirror up in front of us? And you guys did a brilliant report for us, and the findings have been really good, which we can talk about in a bit. But essentially, I wanted to know, are we hitting the right sweet spot for the analysts and data professionals? How do we compare against other similar entities? And is there any return on investment, not just necessarily monetary, but in terms of time, in terms of upskilling? And of course, what homework do we need to take from your report going forward?
No, and that's important. It's for us, it's all about what works, what doesn't, and what do you do next. And yeah, so it's been really interesting to get involved in doing that for you. And obviously, we interviewed a kind of like a representative sample of the users and non-NHS and NHS and the partners that work with you. We benchmarked your community against 5 others, a long-standing one from IBM, one called Kaggle that's owned by Google, Data Community DC, which is a non-profit one. There's a community for the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales for data analysts and analytics that we looked at. I mean, the good news is that actually you guys came out very well against all of those communities.
That's good.
And you've got all of the collaboration platform that you've already had in use that you mentioned, Future NHS, has got all the functionality you need. I guess the way that this particular community has been set up for Analyst X, however, wasn't necessarily as easy to get around and find your way around. That's what the interviewees told us. So one of the things we're recommending is a kind of like a redesign of the site, and there are other recommendations. What do you think of what we've suggested so far?
So first, David, I think it's really good that you managed to speak across the board and get different opinions from people. I think in terms of the redesign, in a way we were expecting you would say something along those lines. Now, you weren't with us at the start of the journey, David, but we've probably been through 2 or 3 redesigns already. Yeah. And I think that's what's very exciting, because we change, we evolve. It's not the same old. And I think we're at that stage now because this community very much brought people together during the COVID pandemic. And then I'm hoping we're going to get out of the pandemic soon, and people will move away from COVID, but you want them still to coalesce around common topics. So yes, we do need to do a bit of redesign. And I think the team are working out how they're actually going to do that. I think the bit that we need to work on, what we've recognized is, yes, we are getting a lot of the analysts and data professionals excited by this community and upskilling them, but we're not really touching data literacy and digital literacy in the non-data and analytic community. So if we upskill ourselves to the nth degree and don't do anything about the other community, then we almost have a mismatch, and our customers want to know what to buy from us, so to speak, and I use buy in a very loose term. So I think that'll be the next thing, which is one of your recommendations as well. We need to focus on that. And I think what we have done is we've very much gone with the grassroots movement, bring willing, enthusiastic people who want to work outside their job to do the stuff they do on Analyst X. But we've now probably reached the scale where we do need to have some dedicated resource. So we welcome that report. And thankfully you haven't said we need hundreds of people, but at least we need some more just to get things done. But I particularly like the other part that you've said is we've created something that is more than just the technology, more than just the platform, but actually winning hearts and minds. And then how do we continue doing that? Because technology comes and goes, but you need people to be in tune with the different waves of technology and not lose them along the way. And I think that's what we're really trying to do.
Janet Parkinson, one of our team, has recommended a new model approach to kind of structure it, specifically aiming at that the people you want to bring in.
Yeah.
So we call it the laser model. It's learn, ask, share, accelerate, to kind of divide into areas where people know what they need to do and what they can get out of this. We've also suggested a revised champions program so that the community can actually develop and some gamification in that to actually reward those champions. What do you think of that recommendation we've made?
So we like your recommendation in terms of the framework.
Yeah.
We think it's generic, but it's going to sound odd, fairly specific to get action and momentum going. Yeah. It goes beyond our traditional layout. I think the trick that we will need to pull off, given all the assets we have, how do we start reclassifying them? Or do we, in a way, let the old world just collapse within, and any new communities we build stick to that framework so the old collapses and the new builds up? So we're kind of working out what model we do, but definitely up for the framework. The Champions program, yes, in fact, you reminded us when you presented the report, there's a lot more we need to do, and we probably need a larger Champions program. And at the moment, we have a very, how would I say it, a home-built version of rewarding and incentivizing the champions. Yeah. We probably need the right technologies to support that, and those exist, as you know, David, at the moment. So we are talking to some of our strategic partners right now on how would we make that happen.
Excellent. Can I ask you just to take a step back and tell us who's the audience for this community, who you want to be involved?
So our primary audience has been all the data professionals and analysts within health and care. But again, who is an analyst? Is it a clinician who's interested in analysis? Is it someone who's traditionally been an analyst, gone through some analytical training? Or is it someone who just is generally curious about analysis? So we've become a rather broad church. So we've said anyone who's interested in the discipline, because I think, David, you will know this better than most, as technologies evolve, as analysis becomes a main thing, many people are going to have to retrain into these professions anyway. So it will probably become their third, fourth, fifth career. And so we want to capture that lot. So that'll be our primary audience. Mm-hmm. The secondary audience is probably going to be more our customers, but we see that as a sort of a slow burn. But one of the things we've realized during the pandemic actually is we have very many non-analytical folk who are actually quite terrified of interpreting dashboards. Or even interpreting simple pieces of data, and we need to do something in that front. So that is the secondary audience we're looking at.
Great stuff. One of the when we were talking to people, one of the things that you've done, as well as the collaboration platform itself, is you've put people together in huddles. Yes. Tell us what's a huddle.
So I'm quite impressed to say that a huddle has become a thing in the NHS. It's good. And then we have the second chief huddling officer as a title. Someone actually has that.
Brilliant.
But essentially it comes very much from the idea, the way they operate in NASA and other industries. You need to bring like-minded people together to discuss, debate ideas, learn from each other, and then move forward. And so huddles have become these weekly gatherings. On a bad Friday, we probably have about 100 people joining us. On a good Friday, about 600. And that says a lot for a Friday, because people should be doing other things, but they've come onto these huddles to basically learn from each other. And the huddles were created very much with, we at the center don't have all the answers, and we generally want to learn from local systems. Now we can start flattening that false hierarchy we have between the national, the regional, and the local areas. And now we've got variants of the huddles, David, as well. We have something called mini huddles. We have Machine Learning Mondays. It's turning up into a whole enterprise on its own.
That's good.
So I think it's just becoming a thing, basically.
No, that's excellent. That's exactly what you need. So one of the things you're doing is refocusing from that kind of very tactical looking at COVID thing to a much more generalist approach now. And for what happens next, like with anything, you need good senior sponsorship. How are you going to go about getting that for what you do next?
So I think we're very lucky in terms of it being a grassroots movement, and we've had a sort of light touch approach from very many senior NHS leaders across all the arm's length bodies who are getting more and more interested in Analyst X and what it could be. So I think what we've done is had distributed senior leadership, and similarly a distributed way of working as well, so that this stays regardless of any organizational change or configuration, which I think is very, very important for the sustainability of the community. But I think the other thing that we are very, very keen to do is how to make sure that people actually see this as a way of working in the future. At the moment, they're sharing knowledge, they're sharing dashboards and assets, but what we would like this to be is almost the place where you get a lot of the work you do as an analyst. So you can imagine what would be fantastic is if we had a national backlog of all the analytical questions and challenges we needed, and then teams could self-form, public, private sector, bring their tools and say, yeah, we'll take that off, we'll take that off, we'll take that off. So almost as a community, you just start solving all the questions that you have. And I think that would be fantastic, actually.
Excellent. Can we talk a bit about the business case? Now we, Alan Patrick in our team's the numbers man. He's looking into all of this. So we've looked at it at the productivity in terms of analyst time and analyst impact, and then we've looked at kind of the various upside cases, which we haven't quantified, but we know there's goodness there. What do you think about the business case we've put forward and the justification of 6 to 7 more full FTEs to help support this?
So I think a few of us looked at your ROI calculations, and we appreciated the caveats you had put in it. And I think we were quite polarized in our view on, so we all agree that there is goodness, we all agree there's an ROI. I think some folk are perhaps even more conservative than you are.
That's the thing. From our point of view, the best way to do this is to make a conservative and defensible case, which still is a solid, good case, and recognise that actually it's going to be better than that.
Correct, and you realise my bias is I wanted it to be even more positive than what it was, because I think there is so much goodness there.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yes, correct.
Excellent stuff. I guess it sounds good. I guess one of the things is, how does this fit in with the NHS's overall strategy? I mean, you're connecting data and people and analyst expertise. Does that fit in with where the NHS wants to go next?
It does. So we've been quite lucky, and we're humbled actually. We've been mentioned in the draft NHS Data Strategy that is going to be published quite soon, as a good example of a community of practice, how you bring people together. Within Analyst X, we also promote the use of latest technologies, be it platforms or analytical tools. There's a huge drive in the strategy to do that as well. In Analyst X, we very much are about how do you move beyond analysis to the so what and the decision-making part, because you can have all the numbers in the world, whether I say there are 4, someone else says there's 5, but if you can't do anything about that number, what's the point? So given that we want to be insights-driven, the data strategy talks a lot about driving insights within the NHS to design these new care models, to make integrated care work. So very much part and parcel of what's happening on that front. And I think if we look very much at the recovery plan as well, that relies fundamentally on collaboration and people working together, and that's been the ethos very much of Analyst X. So thankfully we're no longer a rebellious outfit, but very much part and parcel of what we think will be the future going forward for all these different communities of practice based on their specialism coming together.
Excellent. So from our point of view, we think that the community will become the go-to place for analysts and to come and actually get upskilled and really drive forwards. And it's essentially a model for how the NHS is going to innovate for the future.
Yes, and in fact, I've just come from a meeting today where we were talking more broadly about the digital profession and informatics more broadly. And then we were quite humbled again, because the feedback we got is Analyst X is actually an exemplar for what this could look like in the future. Yeah. But that doesn't mean we should rest. No. There's still a lot of work to be done, and I think we're looking forward to that next phase.
That's excellent. I'm looking forward to it too. And I think that the fact that you've actually kind of reinvented the community a number of times already up to now, then we've made some recommendations. I think you've got to think in terms of a permanent state of reinvention. It's got to be always developing.
perpetual beat, as you call it.
Yes, exactly.
Very good.
Well, Sookie, that's been fantastic. Thank you very much for telling the story for us.
David, thank you very much for being a partner of Analyst X. Very good.
Great stuff.
Thank you.
So, hope you enjoyed that. If you want to find out more about Analyst X, if you go to the Agile Elephant website, or if you just Google Analyst with an X on the end, you'll find out some more. Thanks very much.
Hello. Are you loving today's show? Do you have your own opinions on today's topics? If so, we're waiting to hear from you in our comments feed. Let's hear what our next speaker has to share.
Hello, my name's Matthew Cockrell and I'm an industrial designer based in London. I specialise in creating near-future product experiences for technology-led companies like Samsung, Panasonic, BMW and Sky. I think and design for the future to really try and uncover human and business value, really with the idea of trying to increase business creativity. So I'm not some kind of soothsaying magician with magical powers. Basically, the work that I do is about the pragmatic application of imagination, of research and of vision to inspire businesses to think differently about the future, to help them make decisions that allow them to take advantage of disruptive technologies or shifts in human values. When we think about the future, we tend to think about this: sci-fi settings, set in some future world, generally played out with invented technologies or very advanced technologies. And really, the point of science fiction is to entertain us, to help us explore human values, and they tend to come from the imagination of a single author or a single director. But how do companies who are building technology that will enable our futures think, and how do they develop their ideas? Well, traditionally, they tend to do it in a very linear process that's well established within the industry. It doesn't tend to be that a vision coming from a singular mind, perhaps Steve Jobs or Elon Musk accepted. What really happens is a company is sort of in the now and they want to start to think about how they develop their next product. And oftentimes it's really about incremental change. It's about having the products they've got, improving the performance, offering more benefits to the customers. And in order to then think about what's next, they'll use business strategy to decide exactly what to do. They'll perhaps use the C-suite, the leaders of the company, along with some management consultants to really decide where they're going to invest their money. From that point of view, their strategy and innovation teams then go about deciding, well, what does that actually mean in terms of the things that we will build? And then design and engineering build it. And that's fine when you're improving your existing products. But when disruptions come along, whether that's the emerging technology of machine learning, the metaverse or mixed reality, or whether human shifts around the Great Resignation or around challenges around global heating, those kind of processes don't really work to allow people to cope with disruption or even take advantage of it. And what you really need to do is start thinking a bit beyond the next product that you're doing and think over the horizon, to think about possible futures. Generally, not in a sci-fi way where you're projecting 100 years ahead, but really to think about 4 to 8 years ahead. And that's what I help companies do, really to help them understand possible futures, to then allow them to think about what might be right and to experiment before they invest the millions and sometimes billions in actually building those product solutions. Because if they don't do that, what happens is they simply iterate on their existing products and services, and then those really become disrupted by something that comes along that they weren't expected. Or they'll waste a lot by investing in future product concepts that maybe give good demo and are quite exciting at press launches, but don't really connect with people's lives or the future worlds that they live in. So when we're thinking about the future to try and explore it for clients, it's not very helpful to use science fiction actually, because it's so far advanced ahead of time. It's not generally focused on people's everyday lives. It's normally a fantastical adventure to entertain us. It's not really going to help a business decide how we're going to launch and ship a product. The aesthetic of the future from these sci-fis does sort of creep into business communications with this vague imagery around advanced technology with some white lines and some blue colour that gives us a vague feeling of the future without actually us understanding what the hell it is. And what I'm trying to get to is a real understanding of the future to help inform businesses. The other aspect of the future that companies sometimes do is future concepts that they launch at trade fairs like this. So a BMW car launched a few years ago. But the point of these concepts aren't really for the company. They're for an external facing audience. They're for customers, they're for shareholders, and they're for the market to really try and shift the perception of the brand or help maintain that perception. And it doesn't really connect with the actual products that people design and develop within the company. So what I'm really interested in doing is doing future experiences and building future worlds that can influence these people. And they're the C-suite, they're the leaders of the company who have to make the bets to decide where to play and how to play. So whilst I don't take inspiration from science fiction, I do take inspiration in my process from the techniques of film and theatre production, the idea of developing stories and building worlds, and the idea of pre-production around script writing, around rehearsals, to actually get everything ready and make sure the story that you're telling is going to deliver some value. So if you think about films or TV shows, one of the first things you do from a treatment or a script is actually to visualize these future worlds, because we're trying to paint a picture of a future world. Of course, in science fiction, they're quite fantastical and totally original. But in order to, when we visualize them, what it allows is the production crews, the people who are going to make the props, build the sets, the actors who are going to inhabit this world, get comfortable in this world and understand how it operates. Then through script writing and also then rehearsing through table reads to begin with, and then standing up and actually walking through the experiences, you actually get to test out that experience to understand whether the story the filmmaker telling is really powerful and believable, or if it's a load of old rubbish. And what you're really trying to do is get all of this right and rehearse all of this and understand what's going on before you get into the expensive process of film production, of filming and then post-production. So that mirrors really the process that I try and do and take inspiration from. And so it's about building some future worlds. If we take today's world, it's not very helpful to then create future concepts in this world, because this world is already known, it's already quantifiable, and it's already exploitable. We can immediately start designing products and services for this new world that we've shifted from after COVID. So what I try and do is think differently about that 4 to 8 years horizon. So if we take something actually like technology itself, consumer electronics, our laptops, our cameras, our computers, there's a massive push now from consumers around a right to repair, around the idea, because of the growing amount of e-waste in the world, we really have to change the way our products are made, allowing us to repair them and keep them for longer. The problem with that is that's manufacturers addressing a need right now. But the accelerated climate change that's being driven by global heating is really going to require businesses to adapt to a more radical point of view. So in order to help a business think about that, one of the things that I did last year was to think about an example of something like Apple's iMac that they released in 2021. And imagine that as the last product they'll ever need to make and we'll ever need to own. And the idea here is that products are developed within a circular system where products are continually remanufactured rather than recycled and just repaired. And so to bring that to life and to visualize it, you know, I created this very quick mock-up of a website for Apple for 2031 to help the business understand that concept. I'm not trying to design the product for that time, but the concept and the world that it operates in that allows that business to then rethink about how they might structure their business and how they might create products in the future. The second example is something like augmented reality and mixed reality that's starting to come to most of our phones and tablets. And we've all perhaps had a go of placing furniture within a room to see how it fits and things like that. But it's not really fundamentally making connections with our everyday lives in a really meaningful way. But with HTC a couple of years ago, I imagined the idea of mixed reality 10 years out, where the physical and the digital are more intimately connected, where physical products actually have sort of digital powers. So a globe allows you to show an aircraft of where your partner is and when they're going to be arriving, or even give you tools to help around the kitchen, slicing bread or pouring out ingredients. But in order to get to these worlds, I didn't follow a traditional new product development route where you're focusing on the actual product that enables it. It's focusing on that experience and that story. So it involves storytelling It involves set design, thinking about the scenarios and positioning them, sometimes very simply, not with sophisticated computers, in this case, using small Lego minifigures, but just to understand the human dynamics of a future experience. And then, of course, it requires writing those scenarios and those experiences, using script writing to imagine a real scenario, not just a glossy image, and then actually using those to interrogate that by doing read-throughs and acting them out. In this case, it's a client in Japan where the guy on the right is actually playing a 6-year-old child and the guy on the left playing his father. It can feel embarrassing, but it actually puts you in this future concept and helps you make it more understandable. And then finally, sometimes we might actually prototype live experiences in a house. So in this instance, there's a technology setup here, and we're allowed to show internal stakeholders in the company and even future customers what we're imagining that might happen in the future. And it's a very good way of validating, of understanding what they value and what they might think is just total nonsense. So ultimately, what gets delivered to the C-suite, the leaders of the company, can be a slick video like this that brings this world to life. But it's founded on research, it's founding on a technical roadmap, and it's really been road tested by doing the rehearsal of the experience, by prototyping it, by really interrogating it, rather than provide a surface vision that really allows them to think about that future world differently, to even then imagine the kind of future products and services that might enable that experience. Ultimately, to allow them to make the big bets on where and how they're going to play in the future, what they're going to make, to allow them to take advantage of disruption and hopefully deliver value to us and their business.
That's nearly the end of this morning's session. Don't forget to like, share and comment. Now we have our wonderful Tech Data panel hosted by Neil Cornish.
Hello everybody, and also welcome to Jay, to Tony and to Bob here at the Skyline stage hosted by Seasons today. Today we're here to look at the challenges and the opportunities being created in startups, in new businesses. Try and get a view from yourselves and also what we're seeing in Europe. I guess as a place to start, Bob, be interesting to hear from you as Next Gen Director for EMEA. What are you seeing in terms of new opportunities from startups, perhaps coming across your desk?
Okay, well, look, first of all, thanks for the invitation to today's session. I mean, I think the first point I make, and I think it's good news, is that it's very buoyant across Europe. IBM is working with a large number of partners, startups, but also partners who are perhaps looking to diversify their business, perhaps partners who are looking to partner with other organisations to open up new markets. And that's all feeding into programs that we offer that support those partners on that journey. In terms of the sort of trends we're seeing, there are the obvious areas such as security, clearly a very hot area, continues to be, sustainability, and goodness knows with the current situation around energy, anything in that area is very, very hot. But I also think we're seeing that what I'd call some of the more traditional areas that people would expect organisations to think about, such as how can I improve customer service, how can I reduce costs, how can I drive customer loyalty, how can I win new business, all the sort of things that apply and have applied in years gone by are also driving new business ideas and therefore startups to come to market and say, we think there's something we can offer that will make a difference to a company or an organisation, etc. So that's important, that we don't lose sight of the fact that there are all those existing things which continue to be successful. And I think that the final thing that I'd say is that, and we're recording this in the UK, is that the UK is probably amongst the markets, perhaps one of the strongest in terms of businesses that are bringing new ideas forward. So I think whilst I represent Europe, and it's great to see lots of other countries with a very strong, successful startup market, the UK is perhaps one of the strongest in Europe.
That is really interesting because we've seen, I think you'll both see this, the number of new partners and startups coming to us over the last 18 months, 2 years now has been phenomenal, and very diverse offerings, I would say. I mean, Tony, you've got an interesting challenge. We've seen you over the last 18 months with the new ideas and then the pivot. Perhaps tell us a little bit about the challenges you've been through.
Well, obviously, the impact of COVID, we were discussing earlier, and it had quite a good impact in some way because it allowed us to work through our ideas, test them in the market in a gentle way, and then refine them. And as to pivoting, I think I've probably done it 2 or 3 times. But of course, working closely with IBM, working closely with the business partner network, you're getting the feedback, you're honing them, because we have a unique challenge. We have to work at the strategic level with IBM, and then we have to work, if you like, at the factory floor, that the product we're developing has value, has use, and can actually meet the points that you mentioned earlier of saving costs, automating workflows, making the product more, enhancing customer service, and driving value. Because if there's no value, there's no point.
That's actually really interesting because we've seen in all those new partners come to us, one of the challenges very often is getting them to tell us what's the value proposition. You know, what is it that you are offering to your customers going to make them change their budgeting to buy your product as opposed to what they buy at the moment. So I would suggest, we've seen that from quite a lot of the new partners coming to us on that. Jay, you're a serial entrepreneur. Is that fair with now CX Review? You've sort of been around this industry for a while now. What have you seen that over the last sort of 18 months as you've got CX Review sort of off the ground?
Yeah, I think kind of, so since the 90s, I think I've kind of gone through 4 startups.
Oh, right.
So I've gone through sort of, the challenges in the 90s right through to, how we have to develop our business today. And it's really interesting. I think on the whole, and just sort of agreeing with what Bob was saying and also what Tony was saying, is that, it has become a lot easier. And primarily because there's a lot of funding available, right from risk capital, right through to the, kind of all the levels of business growth, but also social media. I think right now, if you come up with a product, you can reach your market that much easier. In the old days, it was really hard. It's who you know, and there was a huge investment required to be able to kind of do that, And perhaps one of the biggest advantages I think that we found right now is that larger companies are happy to buy from innovators, and this wasn't the case a few years ago,
That's interesting. So we were talking earlier about the fact that you have to replace something else in the budget. But what you're suggesting is that maybe some of those larger companies are actually leaving something aside for innovation to go and invest in new ideas rather than putting it into next year's budget because we've seen it. Is that sort of fair?
Yeah, absolutely fair. Yes, and I think one of the reasons for that also is that the technology is moving so fast. So what is innovative 2 years ago is certainly not innovative today. So you're finding businesses, I don't know whether you've seen this, but you find really there was a budget 2 years ago for doing something, pre-pandemic almost. Now the world has changed. So, looking at a whole lot of new sort of tech. So it's sort of, it's an interesting place.
Is that changing the time to market? Now, I don't know whether you're seeing this, Bob, with people who might come to you. What do you think their average time between sort of coming to the idea and actually getting it into the market is now?
I agree with Jay's point. I think most companies we're working with are trying to reduce that time to the minimum. I think the challenge we're seeing is that unless you've got something absolutely unique, you've got to find your space in the market. You've got to make sure that the potential buyers of your solution or whatever it is you're trying to sell, you can get airtime with them and that you're going to have credibility, that they're going to want to talk to you.
You know, from our point of view, that's where, and perhaps we'll talk about it later, where we hope there are some things that IBM can do as part of that journey for the partners to remove or help reduce some of those potential roadblocks. So clearly I'm, you know, representing a technology organisation primarily, but Neil, as you and I know, many of the conversations aren't just about the technology. They could be about, you know, how do I win new clients? How do I market myself? And they're all things that I think we're seeing, if we can help with those, in addition to any other support or engagement you may have, they're the things that can reduce that cycle time.
No, I agree. In fact, very often the technology solutions we see coming to us are fantastic. And so there's no doubting the enthusiasm that people bring with them. Very often the challenge is actually working out how do you get it into somebody's hands. You know, how do you get them to part with money with this great idea? So that we're certainly seeing that as being the challenge. You've been looking at new routes to market, I think, haven't you, Tony?
Yes,
how's that going?
Well, that has presented a really big challenge, because we have to understand, as Bob said, where our position is. And we also have to understand that we have to offer something that's a little bit more and a little bit different to the people that we wish to engage with. So what we're finding is we're creating ecosystems within ecosystems, and we have to create our own. We have to be clear, and we have to build trust. So one of the things we have done is we've said we won't compete and go direct to clients. We'll work through the channel. And then, of course, we're working with IBM Direct, and of course IBM Direct are working with the channel. So we don't at any time want to be seen, if you like, to avoid any scope for channel conflict. That's the bare starting point. The second point that we think we have to do is we have to put ourselves very much into the business partner's shoes and say, why are you going to spend time with us? What is it you are going to bring? And focus on these points of how are we a point of differentiation to win new business? How are we going to make the product better from a customer enhancement perspective? What are we going to do for you, the business partner? How are we going to pay you? How are we going to reward you? How are we going to build the relationship? What does it look like today, and what do we expect it to look like tomorrow? What's our part of the bargain? What's your part of the bargain? And a lot of this revolves around education. With social media, there's a lot of content created. And what you have to do is to make sure the content you're creating is something that's relevant. And the only way you're going to do that is actually getting there, meeting them, getting to know them, the same old tried and tested techniques that we've done, you know, when we're all at a certain age in our early days, are now actually even more valuable. And I think the pandemic has brought this into sharp relief. Look at when we first met today, how we were so glad to meet a real person.
It's true, actually. Yeah, they're very, very true.
Now,
I mean,
here you are.
All three of us have been meeting over the last 18 months or so, you know, all on Zoom. So you're right. First time we've all met, I think, face to face for 18 months.
Yes.
So, yeah. And do you think that will help you now as you go into your new, you know, prospective clients and new partners? Do you think face to face now is they're going to welcome you back in?
Yeah, I think certainly. I mean, because everybody seems ready to meet once again. It's been quite difficult, obviously, the pandemic. A lot of things have changed. I mean, we work in the call center space. So in the call center space particularly, you know, I mean, they've gone from having everybody working out the office to having thousands of people working from home. And that kind of has, you know, implications on security. You know, personal or you know, personal data security of somebody working from home. So there's a great deal more focus, I think, and the requirements of the call centers have changed as a result of that. You know, so as an innovator, as a business, you've got to kind of, you know, pivot with that.
Spot the change, because I think
you have to spot the change and deal with that.
One of the things I know from our calls is that although many have come through the pandemic and been fine, actually there's been a big increase in vulnerable customers in quite a lot of sectors, hasn't there?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think two main areas. One, I mentioned security. The other one is vulnerability. So it's not just looking for vulnerability in customers, but also in the agents working from home. Because if you don't look after them, then the quality of service that you provide is affected. And I think the other area that has certainly come much more to the fore is compliance. So, yeah, things are changing, and I think as a, you know, as an innovator, somebody that's always looking to kind of build a business for the future, you've got to react to market changes, and those market changes are happening all the time, you know, in our world.
Are you finding that other people within the channel are interested in engaging with yourselves, with what you've got? Are you finding people who would like to take new solutions to market?
So far, yes. It is a challenge because you're competing for time. And when you're innovating, you haven't got a track record, you haven't got case studies, and you have to build those up. And you have to put a lot of energy and effort into doing that. And you have to be mindful that you're one of many, but that doesn't mean that you sit quietly by and wait for it to come to you. And I think the greatest challenge is to how to be innovative around presenting your innovative product. You've got to find something that's a bit different, and we'll have probably future discussions on how best to do that, I hope, in the future. But I think it's always good to start with the idea that it's a collaborative effort, and you've got to be prepared to collaborate, not compete.
Yes.
And you have to be consistent in how you approach each business partner, and you've got to be respectful of the fact that you'll be getting information that is confidential. But I'm really looking forward to expanding the work that we do with the business partner network, mindful though that IBM do come calling as well.
Yeah, it is interesting actually. I think we were talking earlier about this idea of, in the past, businesses sort of building a moat around their business where they were keeping their people, their IP and their customers sort of tight to them. And how that sort of changed, I think, over the last 3 or 4 years now, where there's far more, well, who else could we bring in that we might then be able to offer a different set of solutions to our customers. So rather than simply say to the customer, no, we don't do that anymore, actually we could do that because we could go and partner to do that. And I do see that as being the new role, if you like, for those larger partners in our community, certainly. Is that sort of fair? Are you seeing that across the rest of Europe now, Bob?
Yeah, absolutely.
More partnering?
Absolutely. Well, there's a couple of things. So one, obviously from IBM's point of view, you know, being an open organisation to work with other vendors, other partners is absolutely, you know, part of the DNA of the organisation now. And from a partners working with partners point of view, well, I suspect you probably remember this, but we launched our tool Business Partner Connect, which was to just provide a place where partners could either find other partners who perhaps had something that would complement what they were doing. Perhaps they needed access to particular skills. Perhaps there was a part of a solution that they wanted to add to be able to deliver more value to an end client. Or it could be they were offering something. So they were either effectively buying or selling, but only in terms of doing the introduction, a matchmaking service, and then the commercials and how that relationship would work was then down to those partners talking to each other and deciding whether there was a match or not. And I mean, that, again, you know, I won't show exact numbers, but that's got many, many hundreds of partners across EMEA who use it. And indeed, it's also sort of cross-transatlantic as well.
Oh, right.
And I think Tony made the point that this kind of model of, you know, partner relationship with IBM, relationship with end client, that exists clearly still in many cases, but these other ecosystems where you connect with other partners and with clients in different ways are becoming more and more pervasive.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing that. In fact, if you look at what we've been doing with the tech data ecosystem over the last 3 years now, we've sort of positioned ourselves almost as sort of marriage brokers, in the sense that we're trying to find out about the different partners, what they want, how they want to go to market, what their value proposition is, and then see if we can find other people within that community that we can match them with. I say we get to the point where they can get married, but after that, you know, it's then the contracts and how they want to then go to market, to a certain extent, then is down to them. But if we can make the introductions and make them a good fit, then what you hopefully get is new solutions to take to market. Fantastic. So last thoughts as we go round then. So a new startup sitting in front of you, what advice would you give to them before they sort of start off on the journeys that you've both been on?
Well, I think from my perspective, you know, when you start a business, you think you can do everything, and I think that is part of the. So the best thing I think I learned perhaps is to learn myself, you know, to know myself, and what I'm not very good at. And then I would say for anybody that's starting off, just, you know, self-critique is actually very important, because there is a risk that you can kind of take the business down a path because you have all the control, and perhaps go down a blind alley, not really kind of realizing that you're, you know, heading for failure.
Tony, thoughts?
I would say, I mean, at one level, never give up, be prepared for change, and you're only as good as the people around you.
Yeah.
Ask for help. There's plenty of people
Yeah.
that will be willing to help you, and there's good people out there, and you'll learn more that way than you ever will otherwise.
Fantastic advice on that. Yeah, absolutely. Right, so we'd like to say thank you for listening. Thank you to our fantastic panel here on that. If you have enjoyed this and you are interested in perhaps sitting on one of the chairs that Tony, Jay and Bob have been sat on here today, and sharing your views, and whether you'd like to join us in some of the other events, the innovation webinars and so on, then we'd welcome your interest. Please get in touch. Other than that, thank you once again to the Seasons team here and the Skyline stage, which we look forward to seeing later. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And we'll see you again. Cheers. Bye.